Hello, everybody, and welcome to Metaphysical Insights. This is William Becker, and my guest today is the extraordinary Mr. Tom Muir, direct from the Orkneys. So, a land of magic and enchantment. And hopefully, I'll find out one of these days. Tom is, he's a folklorist, a storyteller, historian, archaeologist. He's been on a number of history television shows. I first heard of him, met him through Time Team, and there's so many other things. You're a curator at the Orkney Museum, is that right?
Engagement and exhibitions officer. So
Okay, excuse me.
I research, write, design, set up exhibitions.
Perfect. And you have a publishing company.
Well, that's brand new. We're just starting it, really. We have a website, me and my wife and I, called orkneyology.com.
Okay.
And this is Orkneyology Press. So we will be starting bringing out books in the next couple of months or so.
How do you put the website? I want to post
Orkney
it.
is just ORKNEY. Sorry, I'm dyslexic, so I have to think about these things.
Oh, that's cool.
Orkneyology Press. But orkneyology.com, there is a link on that about the press, so you can find it there. It's just that it's about all things Orkney, so Orkneyology, kind of, the study of Orkney.
Right. And
It
you can
made me laugh at the time anyway. Didn't make anybody else laugh, but it gave me a chuckle.
And it's weird. Okay, folks, I will post that again tomorrow. Because Facebook doesn't like me posting links today, so it won't let me. Who knows? We are live.
Yeah.
I see people are watching, so
That's Facebook.
Yep.
Fault.
Anyway,
Well, that's their lookout. That's their problem, really. They're lost.
exactly. That's what I think. I don't know what I did. It's crazy. Anyway, Tom's going to talk about some of several things I think today, but there's sea creatures or stories, the sea witches, a lot of tales, but I'm also curious as to how you think these tales start. Are they teaching lessons? Hi, Katie. And are they explaining the natural world around them like so many religions do? Are they taking a phenomena and just trying to run with it, or all of the above, or
Probably all of the above, actually.
yeah?
But the one story that we have, which I took the liberty of going back over the last time that we spoke, which was last August, just to see what I was talking about, so that I didn't end up doing the same thing,
Right.
because people would kind of go, "Oh my God, what a one-trick pony! He did all this a few months ago." So I had to look around there to see what was going on. And I did actually tell this story, but I can't talk about the sea without telling this very short little snippet. It was believed that the sea was governed by spirits.
Okay.
And in the summer, the sea was ruled by the mother of the sea. So that the mother of the sea. And she calmed the seas. And she also gave life to all the creatures that lived in it. But she had a rival. There was a male spirit called Terran, and he was kept bound at the bottom of the sea. But as the year wore on, the mother of the sea lost her power, lost her strength from giving all the life to the creatures, from calming the storms, and Terran breaks his bonds and fight. And this is when we get storms at the equinox in the autumn. And she is defeated and is driven from the sea and has to live on land. and nobody can see her because these spirits are invisible to mortal eyes. But she lives on the land until she regains her strength over the winter. And when the spring comes, she goes back into the sea again. And her and Terran fight. And again, this is when we get the storms at the spring equinox.
Okay.
And he is defeated and is bound at the bottom of the sea. And there he remains while she gives life to the creatures and calms the storms until the next autumn when they will fight again. And so it goes on and on forever. Now, that story must be ancient. There's no way that it can't be, because people that, telling the story, and this story was recorded in the 19th century. People who told these stories were already Christian.
Okay.
But the story itself must have predated Christianity.
Right.
Because if you were to make up a story about a goddess who controls the sea, well, that's blasphemy. You're going to get in trouble with the church,
Right.
especially back in the day with the Catholic Church, where you could be burnt as a heretic.
Yeah.
So you're not going to start making up stories about goddesses. But it was such a powerful, such a strong, widely held belief that it continued up until fairly, modern times. But
Okay.
so it must have come from before Christianity reached these islands.
Right. And
Um,
she's something of a of a fertility goddess, it sounds like, too, and that she's
yeah,
producing all the life in the sea.
yeah, she's very much a goddess that brings life. So that must be very ancient. So it's pre-Viking,
Right.
and probably pre-Pictish, because we don't know. We don't know what the Picts believed in. They were people that lived here from around kind of the early centuries AD until the Vikings arrived around the late 700s, sort of 800 AD.
Okay.
But by that time, they had already become Christian. They were they were ordered to become Christian by their King Nectan
Okay.
in 719 AD, if my memory serves me well. So then there was Christian settlements in Orkney. There was old churches in Orkney at that time. When the Vikings arrived, it was already well established. Whether people still believed in old gods and or such like creatures, of course, I don't know. Nobody does.
Right.
Nothing was written down. And then the Vikings came along and it all became, Odin and Thor and Freya.
Right.
And then it got Christianized again. So, we were sort of done twice. And but that must be a very ancient belief.
It sounds like it. And my understanding, and I don't know as much up there, but I know in other areas of the British Isles, it seems like Christianity and the pagan religions existed side by side, at least for quite a while.
Well, yeah, they did actually. And Christianity adopted a lot of pagan holy days
Yes.
so that they would then attach a name to it.
Right.
Like Chonsmas for Midsummer or Christmas. The Mass of Christ. So they were applying, saint days to events that were already being carried out.
Right.
But there is mention in Orkney Inga saga, which is an Icelandic saga written in the early 1200s about the Earls of Orkney, the Jarls, as they were known. And it says about a man called Sven Brestrup, who was a pagan, and he also conjured up evil spirits to converse with them to get power
Okay.
by sitting out all night. Now, this was in 1135 when he was killed in an argument about a drinking contest. It's Orkney,
Yeah.
but there was somebody. I mean, the ruler at the time, the Jarl, who, he was his man and an important warrior for the Jarl, but the Jarl was Christian, and they
Okay.
were going out to mass, and Sven wouldn't go in, but he would sit up all night to conjure up spirits. So when he's done in by a young chieftain, a young warrior called Sven as Leverson, he runs off and gets sheltered from the bishop of Orkney because he says, well, he was a nasty pagan that was summoning up spirits. And so there was, written evidence that this was going on. It would have been going on in a lot of households quietly,
Right.
but Sven was a powerful warrior, obviously owned a lot of land as well,
Hmm.
and he was able to. He was indulged. He was allowed to get off with it. Maybe ordinary people would have faced fines or some sort of church punishment,
Right.
but he got off because he was too useful to the Jarl.
Hmm.
But yeah, so Christianity and paganism were certainly coexisting,
Yeah.
although probably, like I said, with the paganism, keeping it kind of quiet below the radar,
Hmm.
so that they didn't get into trouble.
Right.
But
Well,
it
and I
was
would
the same
imagine
after
it.
the Reformation.
Yeah.
It was the same after the Reformation, where you weren't allowed to go to the old Roman Catholic chapels and pray at shrines there, or carry, do pilgrimages to
Right.
these places in order to be cured of whatever ailments. That was seen as papist, and you were not allowed to do it, and you would be punished if you were. You'd be fined and made to stand outside the church with a chain around your neck, and a collar. The chugs, they were called. So, you kind of, so you had that sort of dual thing where you had paganism and Christianity, but the Roman Catholic faith. And then the Roman Catholic faith became the one that you weren't allowed to practice, and
Right.
you would be punished if you were caught practicing it. So it's kind of ironic, really.
Yeah. And pretty typical the way that seems to run throughout history all over the world in a lot of ways, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, who's to judge? It's history. We can't
Yeah.
we can't judge the past by modern eyes. We learn from it.
No.
Um, but I wonder how much that paganism helped form the actual practice of the early Christianity in Scotland and the Orkneys.
Well, certainly some of the big feast days were adopted by the
Mhm.
church, like I said.
Right.
Maybe some of the practices as well, although, it's difficult to tell because a lot of it got kind of made up in the Victorian period.
Right.
They liked to find kind of earlier, symbolism going on. So it's difficult to know, and because some of it was just kind of made up.
Hmm.
So you could say that things like mistletoe, kissing under the mistletoe. Oh, that's obviously a pagan fertility ritual.
Right.
But again, it was only introduced into this country in the middle of the 19th century, really.
Oh,
There were sort of things going on. Now, I could be wrong with that, and I'm sure there'll be people writing in saying that man's an idiot. And they would be right, of course. But I'm an idiot that admits that he doesn't know everything.
to
Um,
me, that's a
so
very smart man.
it's
The
but yeah,
idiot.
there was a lot of things that we associate as being ancient, which came in the Victorian period
Okay.
because they really, really loved Christmas. It became a big thing,
Right.
and with Prince Albert coming across, marrying Queen Victoria, coming from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, he was from Germany.
Okay.
And that was the family name, was Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. And until they became Windsor during World War One, for
Right.
obvious reasons.
Yes.
So he introduced things like Christmas trees and such like, so from Germany, when it was already an old established custom.
Right. And I think that went back to the sun gods, worshiping them, because the Christmas tree with the light and the colors and such. If my reading of history is correct.
I once did a radio program for Radio 4 with a guy called Professor Ronald Hutton. And Ronald Hutton is, I'm a bit of a fanboy when it comes to Ronald. He's one of these brilliant English eccentrics, that England does so well.
Yes.
Scotland, we do nutters, but they do eccentrics. Keith Moon, the drummer of The Who, once said that the difference between, if you had money, you were eccentric, and if you didn't, you were a nutter, you were mad.
Right.
But he is neither of these things. But he dresses extremely flamboyantly, like a kind of a late 19th century aesthetic movement follower, So he's all sort of big flouncy cravats and tweeds and stuff. But an amazing guy. He wrote a fabulous book called Pagan British Isles, which is really highly recommend.
Okay.
But he said, anyway, back to the bloody story. Doing this thing, I'm sitting in a studio in Kirkwall at Radio Orkney, so it's a BBC station. And he's sitting in a station in Bristol, right in the south of England. And we're talking about Christmas rituals here, and I was talking about the bar game, which we play at Christmas and New Year. Mass football, which is more like a riot, really, than anything else, than a sporting event. And he was saying that, of all the traditions that are associated or are attributed to paganism, the earliest from that midwinter period was the giving and receiving of gifts. Which kind of surprised me, because I was always thinking, that's corporate though, isn't it? That's kind of, that's business. But apparently not. It was a custom in Celtic times to give small gifts to people that, close loved ones. So there you go.
Interesting. Yeah. I wonder what started that. I wonder what that was based on.
Well, who doesn't like getting a present?
Well, that's true.
So it was just a little something.
Yeah, we've got a few people saying hi.
Yeah.
So nice.
Hello to you all as well. I don't have my specs on, so I'm kind of...
Okay. Anyway, if anybody has a question, please go ahead and type it in there, and I'll try to put it up on the board to see it. Now, you've got a few of your favorites, it sounds like, from the sea, which is, a whole variety of different. I don't like to call them creatures. That sounds so judgmental. Beings, I guess, is maybe a good word. And it'd be wonderful to hear a little bit about them and where they come from, and how do you think they develop, and what the stories are, who these beings are.
Well, again, it's very difficult to be able to age a story. You can use things like something like the Mother of the Sea, which is a reference to a goddess, which you wouldn't be, saying and putting that forward if you were a Christian,
Right.
because, well, for a start, because it'd be rather dangerous for your, bad for your health.
Right.
But also, of course, you wouldn't believe it.
Mhm.
So it's obviously something that's been so strong and so old that it gets passed down, because it wouldn't have been made up between the Christian period and when it was recorded in the 19th century.
Mhm.
But one that certainly must go back quite a long way is the Mermaid. And there was a little story about how the mermaid got her tail.
Oh.
Um, it's said that a long time ago, when the world was new, there was a great queen who they thought may be Mother Eve herself. And she's walking along the shore one day, along a beach, with her attendants with her, when suddenly she sees a woman sitting on a rock, and she is stunningly beautiful. And she is stark naked, sitting on a rock, combing long golden hair with a golden comb. Now, Eve gives her the once over and thinks she's a bit too good looking. The men are going to notice. So she goes over and presents her with a dress to cover herself up. And this naked lady sitting combing her hair on the rock looks at the dress and looks at her. And she says a little rhyme, which in Orkney dialect goes, I'm the queen of the sea and mermaids me name. Oh, to show me fair body I dinna think sheen. No clays file my skin, no dress will I wear, but the bra tates o me bonny hair. Which I'm sure he got every word of that, but it means I am the queen of the sea, and mermaid is my name. To show my fair bonny body, I do not think shame. I don't find it shameful.
Right.
No clothes defile my skin, no dress will I wear, but the beautiful bunches of my beautiful hair. So, turned down flat. Eve's
Mhm.
not happy. She goes to see God to complain. And she says there's this woman sitting on the rocks down there, and she's so stunningly beautiful, this mermaid, that men will never look at us mortal, land women if they see her. So we want her to be doomed to wear a fish's tail. And God says, well, okay then. So the mermaid was given a tail. But the men found out about this, and they went to see God as well. And they managed to get a little caveat put on the end of this, so that if a mortal man fell in love with a mermaid, then she would have the power to set aside her tail
Ah.
and would be able to walk on legs again. And since then, mermaids have always been on the lookout for a human husband.
Okay.
Now, obviously, that story is using Christianity as a way of, you know, explaining why a mermaid has a tail.
Mhm.
But it's slightly controversial around here, especially on the island of Sandy, which is where my father came from, way up in the North Isles.
Okay.
And at that time, when Walter Child Denison was recording these stories from local crofters and cotters, peasant class, which is where my family came from, they were he said that the old men and the old women used to argue about whether or not a mermaid had a tail, because the old men said that she did have a tail, that a tail was part of her body. And the old women would say that the old men were foolish because she did not have a tail. She had a beautiful petticoat embroidered with gold and silver, and it could be tied over her feet when she was in the sea, and it shone like a fish's tail, but it was actually a garment. And underneath it, there's a pair of milk white legs, which appears in some of the stories as well of mermaids that abduct men. They bewitch men and they take them to the bottom of the sea to live for them.
Okay.
But they then, they seem to have a fish's tail, but then there's a pair of white dainty feet appear from underneath it, and so all is well with the world.
I hadn't heard that before. This is fantastic. Yeah.
Well, there is a wonderful, stories from Sandy, because a lot of them are, because it was just, that was where the man was recording them, writing them down. He said that the reason that mermaids were on the lookout for human husbands was because they were the women of the Finn folk. Now, the Finn folk were a race of men that lived under the sea that was supposed to have fins like a fish.
Okay.
But they could use their magic, their sorcery, to wrap these fins around themselves to make it look like clothes. And but they were great sorcerers. They lived on magic islands, invisible islands called Hildeland, which is from an old Norse word. Hildren is a mirage at sea. And I have seen Hildeland personally.
You have?
Yes, in great detail, because I had a pair of binoculars with me.
Okay.
And two of my brothers were there at the time as well. And there was an island floating on the surface of the sea where there wasn't an island. There was the east end of the island of Shattensea, and there was the west side of the island of Stronsea. And in between those islands, there is nothing to be seen. But there was an island floating on the sea, and it had a large building on it as well that had an arched doorway. Now, it was middle of summer, and it was a hot, humid day. And we watched this island for about 10 minutes, and it started to melt away at the west corner. So the sort of bottom left-hand side started to slowly melt away.
Okay.
And then the right-hand side started to melt away. And then, eventually it was hovering above the sea. But this grey building was still there. And eventually it faded away till it vanished. And there was nothing there again. Now, the explanation for this is that it's refracted light. And there is actually an island, the aforementioned island of Sandy, is between those islands. But you can't see it because it's so low in the water. It is just basically piles of sand,
Right.
It's quite a big island, but it's not very high. But there is a ruin of an old house on it called Geramount, which I knew nothing about at the time. I mean, this was back about the early 1980s. And I had hardly been to Sandy at that time. But it's a house that's now ruined, but it does have a big arched doorway. So it's possible that that's what I saw.
Right.
But see it, I did. I mean, it's and there was two of us there as well to back it up. So you can see why they have this belief.
Right.
But the story was that if a mermaid marries a Finn man, then she will slowly start to lose her looks. So at the end of 7 years, she will be extremely beautiful, but only as beautiful as the most beautiful human woman. And after another 7 years, she will still be beautiful, but nothing, okay, but not absolutely drop dead gorgeous.
Mhm.
And then after another 7 years, she loses her looks completely, and she turns into what was known as a fin wife, which was basically like a hag. And in that form, she would be sent by her Finman husband to live on the land as and act as a witch, because they were all great sorcerers. And if she was in Orkney, she would say that she came from Caithness in the north of Scotland, or from Shetland, further to the north of us.
Mhm.
And if she was in Shetland, she'd say she came from Orkney. If she was in Caithness, she'd say she'd come from Orkney. So they always came from another place, other than where they were, so that it wouldn't get into that embarrassing thing of, well, who's your family.
Right.
And they're expecting a genealogy, and they're expecting an in-depth one, and so you skirt around that. You can say,
Right.
no, I come from somewhere else. But there is a story about, they said, if they manage to snag a human, then they will remain beautiful forever.
Ah.
So it was in their best interest to nail a human. And so they would they would watch out for a particularly good looking and athletic young man. One such was a guy called Arthur Dearness, who lived on Sandy, and he was extremely handsome and a great sportsman, feats of strength and agility and speed and all that. Nobody could touch him. But he was engaged to be married to a woman called Clara Pace. But the one day he was down gathering limpets off the rocks to go fishing, and he saw some big limpets on the underneath of a shelf of rock that stuck out over the sea. So he was lying on that, chipping away the limpets, when he heard the most beautiful singing. And he looked down in the sea, and he saw a pair of blue eyes, piercing sapphire blue eyes, staring up at him. And then a pair of milk white arms wrapped around his neck, and the most beautiful face that he'd ever seen rose up out of the water and kissed him, and then pulled him down into the water. And he lost consciousness. And when he came to, he was in the bow of a boat, and they were a long way out at sea, and there was no sign of any sign of land. And in the stern of the boat, there was sitting the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen in his life. And her petticoat was twisted up into the shape of a fish's tail. And with that petticoat, she was using it like a paddle to propel the boat through the sea. And he was going to cry out, and she spotted that he was awake, and she leapt forward and she kissed him on the mouth, and she breathed into his mouth. And it was like honey going down his throat. And he lost all memory of home, of his family, and of Clara Peace, who was to be his wife. Now, it's a very long story, so I won't go into the rest of it, but basically she takes him down under the sea, and they go through various rituals, wedding rituals, which will bind him closer to her. But his efforts to carry out to the letter all of these rituals is disturbed by a black cat who appears and who eats part of the wedding feast, and who nudges his horn of wine, and so it spills down his front. And this is a local witch who is a relation of Clara Peace, who manages to transform herself, find out where he is, go down to the bottom of the sea, and then break all these charms, and then eventually have him brought back to Sandy again. But there's a lovely mentioning of they have a feasting hall, and they have the foy hall. No, a foy is a party.
Okay.
In the north, that's a dialect word in Shetland. A foy, Foy, is a party. There's a lot of them in Downing Street. It goes on the whole time.
Yeah.
But you may have heard about it on the news.
That's been big news around here.
But
I feel insulted. I didn't receive an invitation.
me neither.
I don't understand why.
Well, more for them, I suppose.
Yes.
But the foy hall had curtains of light that shimmered, and they shimmered and rose and fell, and they were the merry dancers, the aurora borealis, the northern lights. And the halls were decorated down both sides with these beautiful shimmering curtains of light. So it all sounds rather nice.
It does.
And it ends up with him thanking this Aunt Marion, as she was known, for saving him from this life of ease and luxury and decadence with the most stunningly beautiful woman in the world. But of course, he loved his Clara, and the two of them were married immediately, so that there was no more danger of mermaid abductions, because they only go for single guys.
Okay.
And but they said that down at the rocks at Hammernes, where he was abducted by her, where he was picking limpets off the rocks, they say that on a clear morning, you can still hear Auga, was her name, the mermaid, singing a sad song of lost love. So I haven't tried going down there at the dawn to. I'm married, and I don't think I'd be her type.
You might hear the song and be safe.
Mm-hmm.
That's a wonderful story.
But the song is very important. The song is intoxicating, and it hypnotizes the hearer. Mm-hmm. So like the sirens in Odysseus and in the Odyssey.
I was thinking about that. Yeah,
he's tied to the mast, and the crew's ears are stopped up with wax, so they can't hear them. Otherwise, they'll just straight into the rocks.
Right.
But everybody mixes up mermaids and sirens. But sirens were like hawks with women's heads.
That's right.
Nothing to do with fish's tails and such like.
Yeah, no, they were a very different being, and
but the creatures, mermaids, are something that you find in different parts of the world as well. I think the most ancient depiction of one is from a carving. I think it's Assyrian, so like modern day Syria. Mm-hmm. So you had this, half human, half fish. But anyway, you have to avoid them because they're tricky.
Yes. Now, are there tales of mermen as well? Because now people are starting to talk about them as.
Not here. It was like I said; they were said to be the women folk of the Finn folk.
Right.
The Finns don't have tails.
Right.
And also, I kind of wonder whether or not this is actually two completely separate beings that have been kind of married together,
right,
mistakenly, because they don't really have anything in common otherwise. They're a bit different, but
well, Disney kind of changes some of these too, and people begin to think the ancient tale is a modern cartoon.
Yeah. Walter Trail Dennison talks about this because he was saying about people getting mermaids and Selkie folk mixed up. And he said that there was absolutely nothing to do with each other. There was nothing in common there.
Okay.
They were two completely separate entities. And for an old Orkney crofter to be told that a mermaid and a Selkie were the same thing, he said that they would just find that utterly ridiculous and would laugh at you for your ignorance. But he does have a wonderful description of an old woman when he was a child. Now, he was born in 1825.
Okay.
And when he was a little boy, so you're probably looking at the early 1830s or so,
Okay.
he's sitting in a cotter's house. Now, a crofter is a person who rents a small farm from a laird who owns an island or owns a parish.
Right.
And they rent a small piece of ground. That's what my ancestors were all crofters.
Okay.
But lower down the social scale than that, there is the cotters. And cotters don't have anything really. They're given a piece of marginal land, usually on a hillside, something that's really not fit for cultivation. They're given a small patch of ground that they can work themselves and they can build a little hut on to live in. Some of them, Dennison described as being cut into a hillside so that the back wall of the house is actually just a turf wall with stone then built out around it on three sides. And extreme poverty. These people really have nothing. But in order to get that little piece of ground, they have to do on-car work, so on call.
Oh, okay.
So whenever the farmer needs them, the person that has that bit of land that they're living on, they are then summoned to come and work for them whenever they need it. And they have to drop whatever they're doing. So if they're trying to get what little bit of crop they've managed to grow, if they're trying to harvest that themselves, they have to drop everything and go and work on the farm. Otherwise, they would be thrown out. So these are the poorest members of society. And this was an old woman living on her own, no family to take care of her. And he said that she was sitting there with a foot up on the hearth at the fire, with a big toe sticking out through the hole in her knitted stocking, and a bare foot then stretched on top of the other foot. And she was darning a hole in the stocking that she'd taken off. And she's describing the mermaid and the beauty of the mermaid and where the mermaid lives. And he says that her hands dropped onto her lap and she gazed off into space, completely lost in rapture at the description of this beautiful woman and this beautiful palace made of coral and crystal that she lives in. While around her, they said that she was surrounded by complete squalor. But to her, it was an escape. I kind of view it in modern terms as the problem with drug addiction, with people who can least afford to be a heroin addict, becoming a heroin addict, because it's an escape from a very tough life, which makes life even worse, of course. But it's that form of escapism. To begin with, it feels good until it really then hits home. It's not, but that seems to be the case here, that the old woman living in this abject poverty, total squalor, is now wrapped up in the world of the mermaid and the beauty of it. It's escapism.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating stories. And I mean, the woman sounds like somebody that you'd want to sit around the fire and have tea or something with, um, and hear the stories, even if they were that addictive escape, maybe for her. Um,
Well, the thing is, she would have been passing on stories that she heard as a child.
right.
Obviously, stories have to begin somewhere,
Hmm.
but people were generally passing down what they already knew, what they had been told when they were young,
Yeah.
in the way that Denison passed it down to future generations.
Yeah.
And the the sad thing is that he had lots of notebooks full of these stories, and what happened to them, who knows?
Oh no.
I know his family. I am friends with his great grandson,
Okay.
who is now 91 years old, Duncan McLaren. His name is, lives in Edinburgh. Um, but we don't know. They have no idea. They have things like the guest book from the house where he lived at Westbrook,
Okay.
and they've got other bits and pieces relating to him, but no notebooks. And it makes me wonder whether or not there may have been a bonfire after he died. His wife and, well, they were all very kind of big in the Free Church of Scotland. And I know that they're pretty against them. Well, I mean, in those days, they were pretty against stories. Although he was a member as well, he didn't have a problem with it. But maybe, I don't know.
Do they still have the house?
No, not for a very long time.
Okay.
Again, it was rented from a big landowner, a laird.
Right. Right.
Um, Funnily enough, cousins of my dad's were in Westbrook. So,
Okay.
in fact, the first time team program that I did was at the Nessa Broch, which is what was called Hamaness in the story. It was the old name for Nessa Broch.
Okay.
And I don't know what it means. I mean, a ness is a headland. I don't know what the hammer could be from hammer, which is rocks, not submerged rocks. That's a scary.
Okay.
But it could be something to do with that. I don't know. But yeah. So my paternal grandmother's family were in there, the Tories, no,
Okay.
Tories. So, great people. And if you watch that, first, if you find that old Sandy Time Team program, the man that's in it, that's the owner of the place, is my father's first cousin,
Okay.
David. Can I ask you, Mermaid and Selkies are quite. Huh. Right. Yeah. Asking here whether the stories of why the stories of Selkies and mermaids are prevalent in Orkney and maybe less so in other areas, and also about this connection with the Fosin, the Selkies, and Pharaoh. There was a story circulated that when Moses parted the Red Sea and the Israelites escaped across to safety, and then when Pharaoh was pursuing in his chariot with his army, that the seas were closed over them, and that they were turned into seals.
Seals.
Yeah, that
Okay.
was the, that was the explanation. Selkie folk came from Pharaoh's drowned army.
Oh, I
Now,
had never heard of that.
that used to be passed around in Scotland, but in Orkney, they said that there was two versions. The one is that during the battle in heaven between God and Lucifer, who of course was an archangel and was kind of God's right hand man at one time,
Right.
until he got above himself, and some of the angels fought on the side of the devil, some fought with God. Some sat on the fence, didn't get involved, just waited to see which way it was going to go, before they pitched their lot in.
Right.
And so then, when God was triumphant, the devil was cast down into hell, along with the angels that had fought with him. All the ones that didn't join in got thrown out of heaven. But they weren't so bad as to go to hell. So the ones that landed on the land became fairies, and the ones that landed in the sea became Selkie folk.
Ah.
Now, again, it's a biblical interpretation, which would probably be later. But the old belief here, which I think predates that, is that Selkie folk, these are seals. It's the North Atlantic grey seal, to
Okay.
be specific. Common seals are much smaller.
Okay.
And they don't have the power to take skins off at certain times.
Right.
And I'm just reading this as well. Yeah, fallen angels. Yeah, it's just Vanessa's agreeing with what I said there, and that the fallen angels thing was a fisherman belief as well. So, the older, I think, version in Orkney is that they were the souls of people who had drowned.
Okay.
And the implication was that it was suicide. So if you had deliberately drowned yourself, you were fated to become a seal.
Okay.
But you could come ashore at certain times of the tide at night and take your skin off and dance in human form. But as soon as the sun rose, you had back into the sea again.
Okay.
And that was you until the next time. These stories are very strong in the north, but you find them all over, in Scotland and in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
Faroes in Iceland as well, and Norway's got one or two. But the thing is, I know that in Faroes and Iceland, that's very much put forward as being a Faroese story or an Icelandic story. And they are, they're stories from those places.
Okay.
But I think they originated here because when the Vikings were here, we were traveling around between these islands the whole time.
Oh,
There
yeah.
was kinship, there was trade going on, I mean, Viking is a misleading term because it basically means pirate. It's an occupation rather than a race of people.
Right.
So it would be like calling everybody stockbrokers or something like that, or bakers, or second-hand car salesmen.
Yeah.
It's a job, it's an occupation, it's what you do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
You would go a Viking, which means you go raiding. But then you come home and there would be a farm to work, or fishing to go to, or whatever, or trading. And a lot of them, of course, were great traders. And we were going back and forth between the islands the whole time. There was lots of references in Orkney Icelanders being here. So they're taking the stories with them back home.
Mhm.
And it's, that's why you get all the Selkie stories in these places as well.
Right.
But like I said, Denison was very, very clear on the fact that Selkie folk and mermaids, nothing to do with each other. And he said that a friend of his who lived in Shetland said that he had never had tale in Shetland of mermaids until he had found them in English literature.
Oh.
So it was from a literary background point of view, but
Mhm.
no folk tales. And right enough, there's not much in Shetland about mermaids, and they may be a bit later if they're ask
Yeah.
not for whom the bell tolls. My clock on the mantelpiece.
I love the clock. I've got several around the room, but they all need cleaning and conditioning, oiling, and so they're not running right now.
Yeah,
But
well, mine's a bit fast actually. So, but
uh,
yeah, the very very strong here with the Selkies and such like, and I think that the fact that they actually knew the difference between them, I think it's yeah, it's oh sorry, it's
yeah,
Vona Hunter, saying that our grandfather had trolled between England, Scotland, and Iceland. So it's yeah, he would probably be here. He definitely would have been here at some stage.
hmm
All these trawlers. This was on the route. You went to if you're trawling on Scotland, you could end up in Orkney and Shetland, and off up to Iceland. Of course, sometimes you might never actually land; you just be out trawling, you know. But
right.
but yeah, so Mermaid Selkie's different thing though altogether, and the stories are more varied as well. The Orkney stories tend to be about the mermaid abducts a guy, takes him away, or
Mhm.
in one case does a deal with him where she'll marry him if he goes and visits her family on the sea after 7 years, which he does and never comes back again. And but Selkie's rather different because they're always the victims in stories. It's usually, a young man down at the shore. He hears music, singing, and laughter. It's the night that the Selkie folk can dance,
Okay.
and he steals the skin of a beautiful young Selkie maiden, who then has to go home with him and live with him and have a family with him until such time that she finds her skin again. Usually in the story, it's a child that betrays the hiding place of the skin, and it is taken. She finds it and she goes down to the sea, and in some cases rejoins a seal husband,
hmm
or just she has to go back. My favourite story is from the parish of Dearness in the East Mainland here, near where I was born,
Okay.
and the um, do you want to hear it rather than
Yeah,
just explaining it? It'd
I
probably be
would love
just
to hear it.
okay.
Yeah.
There was a young man was walking home late one night when he heard music, and he didn't know where this was, coming from and who was making it. But he was curious, so he went down to the shore and he very carefully went along, and he hid behind a piece of rock that outcropped from the side of the banks from the cliffs. And he looked around the shore, and there was a rocky shore, and then there was a beautiful strip of sand. And dancing on the sand, there was a lot of people dancing in the moonlight, and the music came from two men playing fiddles who sat on a flat rock. Now, all around the dancers, there were shapes lying on the ground like animals lying asleep. So he got down on his belly and he crawled along the shore among the rocks and the seaweed until he got to the sand where these animals were lying. And he got to them and he discovered that what they were sealskins, empty sealskins. And he knew that this must be the Selkie folk, and this was the night that they could take human form and dance. Now, the one skin was more beautiful than the others. It was a lovely, soft, silky, silvery coloured skin. And he wrapped it up tight and he hid it under his jacket, and he went back to his hiding place and he watched them for the rest of the night until the first rays of the sun appeared above the horizon and the music stopped and they all ran down to their skins and pulled them on and dived into the sea and swam away as seals. All that is except for one young woman who frantically searched for her skin, but she couldn't find it. And in her panic, running around looking through the rocks, the seaweed, she ran around the corner of that rock right into the young man's arms. And he looked down into her beautiful, wide, brown, frightened eyes. And he thought he'd never seen such a beautiful woman in all his life, and that he knew that he would never be happy unless he had her as his wife. She had other ideas, mind you. She slapped them and smacked them and kicked them and bit them and scratched them and squeaked it out to her in the Selkie tongue, because the Selkies have their own way of speaking as well. But he was bigger than her, and he carried her back to the house where he lived with his mother. Now, when he came in with this girl under his arm and a sealskin, well, his mother wasn't stupid. She knew exactly who, or rather, I should say, what this girl was. But she was a kindly old woman, and she'd felt sorry for her because this poor girl just sat there and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. The old woman went to a kist. That's a chest, a wooden chest, that was in the ben end of the house. Ben end is the best rooms, button ben cottages. So she went into this room and she opened the kist and she took out a dress that had belonged to herself when she was young and a lot slimmer. And she thought it looked like it would fit the girl. So she took it and gave it to the girl, and she got her covered up, and she warmed up something by the fire, and she tried to comfort him. She spoke kindly to her and tried to stop her from crying, and eventually, after about 3 weeks, she did. And it was obvious, though, that she was actually very fond of this young man because she followed him around everywhere. So it was no surprise when the two of them got married. And they had a family, and they were very happy together for a while. One day, the Selkie wife took her husband aside and she said, "I want you to make me a promise. You know that I am a creature of the sea, and I know that you have my skin, and I know where you hide it as well. It's in the big kist in the ben end of the house. And I know that you always keep the key on you. But I want you to promise me something. If you love me, if you really love me, never let me get that key. Because you know I'm a creature of the sea, and I don't know whether or not I would be strong enough to resist the urge to go back to the waves. Really love me, never, ever let me get that key. I won't, I promise, he said. Now, time passed, and it was August, and it was the time of the Lammas Fair. Now, the Lammas Fair was a big event in Orkney. It was held in front of St. Magnus Cathedral. And people came from all over Orkney and from the north of Scotland and from Shetland, and they would sell whatever goods they had to sell. And there would also be a lot of fun things to do for bairns as well. There'd be rides and games and things, and there was nice things to eat, and there was all sorts of things going on. And people, of course, had a chance to meet up with old friends, have a cog of ale between them and a laugh. So the man decided that he would take the bairns, his children, to go to the Lammas Fair and have a bit of fun. And he asked his wife if she would like to come with him, and she said no. She would stay where she was because it was a good opportunity for her to give the house a good clean while they were away and not under her feet. So the man got himself dressed in his Sunday best suit, and he got the bairns all washed and dressed and ready to go. And he took a horse and cart and they headed off to Kirkwall. And they had a wonderful day. The bairns had all these wonderful rides to play on, and they had spun cotton candy, candy floss on a stick. They'd never seen anything like this before, yet alone tasted anything so sweet. And they had a wonderful day. And in the evening, when he was heading back and the bairns were tired, some of them were sleeping in the back of the cart, and he was trundling along the road, and he was almost at home. And when he saw the house, he knew that there was something wrong, because there was no smoke coming out the chimney, and there was no lights on in the window. And when he got nearer, he saw that the door was standing open. A dread gripped him, and he ran into the house and he shouted for his wife, but there was no answer. And then a thought gripped him, a terrible thought, and he ran through to the ben end of the house, and there was the kist, standing with the lid wide open. And he realized then what had happened. In his hurry to go, he had changed out of his work clothes into his Sunday best suit. But he'd forgot to take the key out of the pocket of his jacket. And when his wife was tidying up the place, she wouldn't have been looking for the key, but when she picked up that jacket, she could feel the key in the pocket. She put her hand in and she took it out and she held it and looked at it. And she knew what that key opened and what was inside waiting for her. She went through to the ben end of the house and put the key in the lock and turned it with a click and opened the lid, and there was her skin. And when she saw it, the urge just to touch it one more time was more than she could bear. And when she touched it, the urge just to pick it up and feel it next to her was more than she could bear. And when she felt that skin next to her own, and she could still smell the salt on it, she knew that she couldn't stay. She had to go back to the sea. She ran down to the shore, and with a cry of anger and anguish, she pulled on the skin, she dived into the waves, and she swam away as a seal. Now, the man never stopped looking for his Selkie wife, but he never found her again. But they do say that when the bairns were down at the shore playing, a seal would swim backwards and forwards in front of them, sobbing like its heart was breaking. So there you go. There's a downer for you.
It's a beautiful story.
It is a good story. I love it.
You tell them so well. too. I mean, it's a talent.
Well, everybody's got to have at least one talent.
Yeah, it looks like you got a few
That's
of them going.
um, the yeah, I can't remember what I was going to say now. No, I'm thinking something else. But yeah, I love the Selkie stories, and they are, like I said, very tragic, like that one. But there is another. Well, there are several Selkie stories, different kinds.
Hmm.
Um, there's a wonderful ballad called "The Great Selkie of Sulskeri," which has been recorded by up and coming artists like John Baez and such like. And there's a wonderful version of a very old version, Orkney version of that song, because it's found in Orkney and Shetland. And but it's thought to have originated here. A
Okay.
friend of mine, Dr. Sarah Jane Gibbon, she researched the song, and she reckons that the Orkney version that she sings is an English translation of an Old Norse song. It's to do with the construction of the verses. The way that they are done, apparently, is a kind of a medieval, not Scandinavian or Norwegian style.
Okay.
So we spoke Old Norse until we ended up as a wedding present for James III. Well, it was actually part of his wife's dowry,
Right.
pawned to be redeemed later. We're still bloody waiting, King Christian I. This was in 1468, so I think it's probably a bit beyond hope now, anyway. But
Well, you never
uh,
know.
my daughter-in-law, who is like my wife from Western New York, my stepdaughter, sorry, I said daughter-in-law, stepdaughter. I was bitching about this one day when she was visiting, and she said, "When did this happen?" And I said, 1468. And she thought it was something that had happened in the last 20 years or so, because I'm still annoyed about it. Anyway, but the
Well,
song,
I've always heard that the Scottish have long memories.
aye, well, the Arcadians have even longer.
Uh-huh.
Um, but anyway, this song, it's an absolutely beautiful, tragic story about a woman who has a child to a Selkie man, and who then comes and tells her that he will return and pay the nurse fee, that her nurse's fee for weaning his child, and then he will give her a bag of gold and then take the child. But there's a prophecy at the end of it,
Okay.
which is that she will marry a gunner, and he will go out one day and he will shoot both the son and the Selkie,
Mm.
and which comes to pass, and then the woman dies of a broken heart. That is a very long story called, well, it's actually done as a ballad called The Play of the Lady Odivere, which is a beautiful story as well, along the same lines. But yeah, if you go onto orkneyology.com and you find Tales for Troubled Times, which are recorded for during lockdown to try to help people, something to listen to.
Right.
On one of the Selkie stories there, because that story I told is on
Hmm.
that. And they're all just sitting there, they're free, you just listen to them or you don't, whatever.
They're very
But
good too, people. I've listened to several of them, and I encourage you to do the same.
there's a film of Sarah Jane singing The Great Selkie of Sulskeri. And it's just her voice, beautiful, absolutely. Just I've got goosebumps thinking about it.
Mm.
But it's the old, ancient version. that she thinks was so important in Orkney, survived the transition from Norn, the old Scandinavian language,
hmm
dialect of Old Norse, into Scots. So it was so important, the song, culturally, that they kept it. They
Okay.
translated it, but they keep singing it.
Ah,
And, and it's hauntingly beautiful. I recommend it. But I
excellent.
remember what I was going to say. Um, Ernest Hemingway,
hmm
tenuous, I know. I went out to the house where I was born to visit sometime around kind of 83. I'd have been about 20, you know.
Okay.
And I was reading For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway.
Right.
And I was sitting there reading away this anyway, and I could hear a woman sobbing outside. And I was, of course, confused as to who this was and what was happening. Now, where I was born is on a bay called Ingeness Bay,
Okay.
and it's a shallow, sandy bay with a rocky shore. But when it ebbs dry, you know, it's sand.
hmm
And there was an old road that ran along the bottom of it. And back in the day, before people had places of their own, like you generally do these days, um, people would, it was a bit of a lover's lane, if you know what I mean.
Uh-huh.
People would go down to it. There was an old army camp there. It was next to the airport, Kirkwall Airport, where you fly into, which was built in the war.
Okay.
And so there was a wartime, there was a camp there. And people used to go and pull up there and to be on their own without their mums or brothers or sisters coming in and disturbing them. You know?
hmm
So, yeah, I don't need to draw a picture.
Yeah.
But I was
Dad with
worried
a
that, you know,
shotgun.
I was worried that something had happened, you know.
Right.
Had a couple gone down there and had something terrible happened because there was this woman sobbing like her heart was breaking, really from the heart, just
hmm
sobbing. But then it trailed away into a groan that was not human.
Oh,
And I thought, what the hell is that? And then the sobbing started again. And I got concerned again. And then there was the groan. And I couldn't figure out what the hell this was. I didn't know whether I should go and look or what, you know. And then it dawned on me it was a seal. Seals make a whole array of noises. They
right.
howl, a kind of a haunting, plaintive howl. Um, but they also make lots of other different noises. And one of them is that they can sob and it sounds so like a woman. And I wonder whether or not that is where the belief came from that there must be a human woman inside that seal.
Right.
Because how else could it sound so human? You know?
Exactly.
But
This is
there you go.
fantastic. You know, um, somebody just rang my doorbell. I'm going, Tom, would you mind starting another one? I know we're actually going over a little bit. Let me
Mhm.
just put this on. This is strange. Um,
No problem. No problem.
and I'll be right back. I'm going to mute myself.
All right. Um, there was a woman that lived in the North Isles. Lived on the island of Stronsay. In fact, she didn't just live there. Her dad was the laird of Stronsay. He owned the island. And he had no sons. And so she, Ursula Balfour, was due to inherit the island. And he was always keen that she should marry. And she should marry a laird's son. And they could unite the lands together. And so their grandchildren, the laird's grandchildren, would own all of these islands. Now, she didn't like this idea much. She was a very strong-willed woman, and whenever all these laird's sons used to come along, then she would send them packing with a flea in their ear, and tell them to get lost. None of them was good enough for her. And her father was getting frantic. He was tearing his hair because he wanted her to marry and make a good wedding, make a good match. But she wasn't having anything of it. And the reason for that was because Ursula Balfour was in love. But the man that she loved was not somebody that her father would approve of, because he was her father's barn man. He was a crofter, and he worked in the barn at the laird's farm. And it was his job to thrash grain, thrash oats, and to dry barley on the kiln so that it could be malted. And he was always there working, and Ursula took every opportunity to go down and see him. But the thing is, to disguise the fact that she loved him, she always treated him terribly. She was always on his case, nagging about something. And the man had no peace from her at all. And when she went down to see him, her heart would soar when she saw this handsome young man. And when he saw her coming, his heart would sink. Now, one day Ursula Balfour got lucky because her dad died. And once it was all sorted out and the legal paperwork was done, and she was sure that the estate was hers and couldn't be taken from her, she marched down to the barn and she said to the barman, "Right, you, go home, get washed, shaved, and come up to the big house." "Why?" he said. "You're getting married." "Married?" he said. "Who to?" "Well, me, of course," she said. "Don't you know that I love you?" No, can't say I do," he said. It thought it never occurred to him. "Well, I do. So go and get washed and put on whatever best suit you've got and come up to the house." Well, the invites went around to the lairds, and sons and all that. And of course, they were all horrified. It was the gossip of the decade. Ursula Balfour marrying a commoner, a peasant. Well, and she turned down all their sons. Wouldn't give it 6 weeks. 6 weeks, wouldn't give it 6 days. Well, they turned up for the wedding, of course, because there was free booze and food. So they were there to drink the whiskey, but they weren't there to wish the bride and groom any future success or happiness. And they needn't have bothered, because they had neither of that anyway. Because Ursula soon discovered that, she had ordered this man to marry her. And he had done, because she was the laird. She owned the land. She would have him thrown out if he'd said no. And if she felt spiteful, she could have thrown out his parents as well, maybe his brothers and sisters. So he had to go along with it, but there was no love there, and there is no marriage without love. And so the marriage bed was a cold and empty place. Now, I was going to say Ursula wasn't going to take this lying down, but that's probably the wrong choice of phrase. But Ursula wasn't going to be beaten. So she decided she would take a lover. But the thing is, who? Because it couldn't be one of his laird's sons, because she'd turned them all down already. And they would blab. They would be off boasting. "You won't guess who I was with the other night." She couldn't trust them. So she knew what she had to do. She went down to the shore and she knelt on a rock that hung out over the sea. And she bent down and she shed 9 tears into the water. People said it was the only tears that she ever shed in her life. But after the ripples from the ninth tier spread across the sea and disappeared. A seal's head rose out of the water, and he pulled the skin back from his face, and it was a handsome man. And he said, "What do you want with me, fair maiden?" "I've made a poor choice of a husband," she said. "The marriage bed is a cold and lonely place. I want to feel strong arms around me. I want to know what it is to love and to be loved." "So you've come to the Selkie folk, have you?" "Aye, I have." "Well, I can give you all the things that you want, but I can only come ashore every seventh stream. That's the spring tide. I can only come ashore then, but then I can give you what you were looking for." So they agreed. The Selkie man pulled the skin back over his face and he swam away. That next seventh stream, she was down at the shore and they met. And she felt the strong arms around her, and she knew what it was to love and to be loved. And they met several times. Now, our servant started to notice that Ursula's putting on weight, don't you think? Especially around the belly. Well, after nearly 2 years of COVID, I know that feeling very well, because my belly's not exactly getting any smaller either. But it was soon obvious that there was more than one heart beating in Ursula Balfour's body. And the gossips, of course, was, well, I wonder whose it is. But when the bairn was born, there was no doubt, because it was a beautiful baby boy with big, round brown eyes, and between every finger there was a web of skin, and between every toe there was a web of skin as well. And didn't that tell a tale? Now, the old nurse that looked after Ursula, she took a pair of silver scissors and she snipped the webs of skin away. But as soon as she did that, after a day or two, they would just grow back again. So she kept snipping and they kept growing back, snipping, growing back, until in the end, when the skin couldn't form where it was naturally meant to go, it moved on to the palm of the hand and onto the soles of the feet. And it is a feature known as hard hand in Orkney. And it is said that if you scratch the skin, it has a slightly fishy smell. But that is still to be seen to this day on the island of Stronsay among all the descendants of Ursula Balfour and her Selkie lover. And I remember telling that in Stronsay and then quick sort of looking around the audience, and I could see ones going, "Oh yeah." So it seemed as though this was something that they were familiar with. So,
I love it.
Selkie men as well as Selkie women.
Fantastic. People have commented on how much they love the stories, and they could listen to you tell stories all night, and very well done. And so the reply in the chat room has been very, very favorable.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah, I am too.
I do this because I love the stories, not because I love the sound of my own voice. If you do storytelling because you think you're going to get rich and famous, oh boy, are you in for a disappointment. Well, it has taken me to various parts of the world that I would have never been at otherwise, from Nunavut in Arctic Canada to the shores of Chang Chau and Hong Kong Harbor. So, and many, many places in between. So
That's
I'm
incredible.
not complaining.
No, and no, there was a festival I think coming up last time we talked.
Yeah, I one of the committee that runs the Orkney Storytelling Festival,
Mhm.
which is the last full weekend in October.
Okay.
And this year it was as late as we could possibly have it last year, because Sunday was the 31st of October. And so we had a Halloween, night as well. But we have guest storytellers and there's local storytellers. And so it's last full weekend in October. And this year, I don't know if I've announced this anywhere or not. I'll probably get into trouble for this, but I don't care. I'm always in trouble with somebody or other, so
Oh, I know what you mean.
not maliciously, but I'm always putting my foot in somewhere. But we have so far booked Kath Edwards, who is an English storyteller from Lichfield in the Black Country, up kind of Birmingham area.
Okay.
And Colin Irwin, who is a wonderful storyteller from the Glens of Antrim in Northern Ireland. And he's also a fine musician, singer-songwriter. Check him out. He has CDs of stories out and music. Colin Irwin and Kath Edwards. Really, really delighted to have them along this year. Last year we had Mio Shudo from Japan, but lives in Edinburgh, which makes it a bit cheaper for us to get her here. Anne Hunter, English lady, but lives again in Edinburgh, and Elsa Dixon, who I've been mentoring as a storyteller, who is just turned 19 last month, just very recently, and she's wonderful. She's a great grand niece of George Mackay Brown, the Orkney writer and poet. And it certainly is in the family, because boy, can that girl tell a story.
Fantastic.
And it was lovely to actually have live storytelling again. Because we socially distanced, we wore masks, we had hand sanitizers all over the place, and the committee members and the storytellers, we all did lateral flow tests before each event to make sure that nobody had caught anything. And we encouraged people coming to do the same as well. And there was no cases as a result. So
Excellent. That's good to hear.
So, yeah. So it's still chugging along here, boy.
Well, I have a friend over here that may be there at that point that would love to attend.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping maybe to be around about that point and would love to attend as a.
Be brilliant to have you.
Yeah,
It would really
and
be brilliant to have you.
it's fascinating. Now you've put together anthologies too of a lot of the stories. I know you've recorded many of them, but you've got them in written volumes and such too. Yeah.
I could show you them, but the thing is, I noticed that for some reason this camera here is back to front.
Uh-huh.
This is my left hand.
Right.
So it'll be back to front, but this is called.
Oh, that comes out right. It says Mermaid Bride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's weird. But anyway, The Mermaid Bride, another Orkney folk tales, illustrated by Bryce Wilson. And he does beautiful illustrations. Just trying to find a nice. This is Arthur Dearness and the Mermaid.
Oh, beautiful.
Going off down to the city under the sea. And these are all just made of tiny little dots. And that is me killing fairies by smoking a pipe. I can get that in the picture.
Okay. Yes.
And that was based on a photograph of me. That came out in 1998, which is getting a while ago now. This one, Haunty Folktales, illustrated by Sheila Fechney, that was Bryce Wilson did this on the other one. This is History Press, and the picture there is of, from the last story that I just told, that is the Selkie man,
Okay.
and it's at the Vata Curvester in Stronsay, and you've got the Northern Lights behind.
Wow.
So that's by Catherine Suter, who is a wonderful artist, is coming up to visit us in the end of next month, and we're going to do a couple of books with her. And she's also illustrating a book of stories by Colin Irwin. So it's all, and there's quite a few other big names in storytelling as well over here that are going to have collections of stories. So we're bringing them out to people.
Excellent. Now, can they find these on the Orkneyology website?
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, easy enough to find all of those. So.
Okay. Excellent. This is exciting. I never want to end the conversations, but it's been a little over an hour and a half, and I know it's late your time. Is there anything else that you would like to include or add before we sign off for the evening?
Well, I won't sing, if you don't mind. I don't think you'd like that.
Oh, I'm fine. Whatever you.
No, it's we're kind of, we keep on with the stories because we love them, we care about them, and I know that there are different schools of thought on this, because a friend of mine who is Canadian First Nation storyteller, he is of the opinion that these stories should not be written down, they should be told orally. And that writing them down kills them in a way, because then they're fixed, And I know what he means, because I found that problem in Faroes when I was working up there doing workshops on encouraging, teaching people how to tell stories and use stories for tour guides.
Yeah.
And their stories were collected by a man called Jakob Jakobsen, who was a Faroese guy. He collected words more than anything else, but he collected lots and lots of stories, and he had them published. And then that suddenly became the correct version. And so if anybody told a version that was slightly different, that they got it wrong, because that's not what Jakobsen said.
Right.
And I was saying, yeah, but Jakobsen only wrote down one story from one individual. And within that person's family, there'll be different versions of the same story.
Right.
Within the wider community of the island, there'll be different versions. On other islands, there'll be completely different versions. There isn't a right version and a wrong version. There are versions.
Right.
They just did not get that at all. They just couldn't see that. It was that, no, it was wrong because Jakobsen said so. So I can understand what he means by that. But the thing is, like Walter Trell Dennison's notebooks, he describes, there's a wonderful story, Asipattle in the Stour one, about Asipattle, an ash raker, who kills a sea monster. And as the monster is thrashing around dying, its forked tongue leaves a hole in the surface of the world, which becomes the Baltic Sea. And his teeth get knocked out and form the Orkney Islands, Shetland, Faroes, and then it curls up and dies and becomes Iceland. And the guy kills it by sailing a boat down his throat and setting fire to his liver, which is full of oil. And that's why you still have volcanoes and hot water gushing out of the ground in Iceland, because the liver is still burning.
Makes sense.
But anyway, these stories are being passed on. But if you don't write them down, like I said, the reason I kind of got into that, I went off at a tangent there, sorry. Denison makes a passing reference in an essay that he wrote about this, that there was lots of Asipattle stories. It was like Askeladdin in Norway, the Ash lad.
Right.
So there's lots of stories where there's, the young son that lies by the fire doing nothing, raking in the ashes. The Cinderella character, he becomes, makes good and marries a princess.
Right.
So there are other stories about Asipattle in Orkney. Not anymore, there isn't,
Huh.
They were in his notebooks, and as nobody has his notebooks, they're probably destroyed. And seems it's been 130 years since he died, almost 130 years next year. I don't think they're going to turn up now if the family doesn't have them, which they don't. So if you don't write down stories, they will go if nobody remembers them.
Right.
And you can't expect another generation to learn the stories, because by the time that they start getting interested, it's too late. The old people have gone.
Yeah.
And so the story goes with them, There's so many beautiful stories that have gone into the ground with people that used to tell them. If they're
Exactly.
not written down, then we don't have them.
And I think the stories are such an important part of who people are,
Mm,
who, they're not just fun or interesting or teach a story,
mm,
or a lesson, but it's part of the makeup of the community.
yeah. I always see it's a window into that society.
Right.
I love the fact that a lot of Irish stories are really irreverent. I mean, meant to say,
Uh,
against the church and the big landowners, and these are always figures of fun. Even the
right.
devil,
Mhm.
he gets tricked and cheated. So I think it says a lot about the people that tells them as well.
I,
It's very much from that kind of that background where they're having a bit of a laugh at
right.
authority, poking, thumbing their nose at authority, and so I think it does say a lot about the country and of origin, and
Hmm.
I so I'm all for people writing down stories. If I took all the books off the shelves behind me here that were collections of stories, there would still be a lot of books here, but not as many as a good lot of them, a good third or a half of them would be gone.
Hmm. Well, and so often they actually lead to historic and archaeological exploration and advancement. I mean,
Mm.
people.
Once, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, as a friend of mine once told me a story from northern Sweden.
Hmm.
That there was a story that there was a soldier. Um, there was wars between Sweden and Russia a
Right.
lot because Russia had Finland at one time, so they were neighbors.
Hmm.
And there was a Russian warrior soldier who was killed, and they buried him in a mound with bearskin with him. And that was the story that had been passed down. And they excavated this site, and it was a Bronze Age burial
Right.
of a man on a bearskin. Bearskin was gone, of course, but
Right.
the skull and the claws were still there. They had
Wow.
been preserved. So there was some accuracy in the story, but
Mm-hmm.
instead of happening in the 1800s, it had happened about 4,000 years ago.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
I rest
And,
my case.
and Schulman looking for Troy to prove Homer right, and
Yeah.
it's fantastic.
Mm.
So I appreciate the work you do to keep them not only alive but also available for people, because that's another part. When they're in books, people all over the world can read them and
Yeah.
get a window into the mind of the people at the time.
Mhm.
And
Well, before Mermaid Bride came out, there wasn't a collection of Orkney folk tales, and now there are people all over the world that are telling these stories or using them. I just had a friend of mine in Australia asking if he minded using the Assy Patlin, the Stoorworm story, in a play that they
okay,
were producing, which, of course, no, delighted to. So,
yeah,
yeah, it needs to be passed on, and they need to be appreciated and loved, and
right,
like
right.
us all.
Yes, so true, so true. Oh, this has been fantastic. But um, there are lots of good comments and such in here. But one of them was asking about the links, and I will post the links tomorrow. Facebook in here. Facebook isn't allowing
Mhm.
me to today because I'm a bad boy and a radical, and I've upset somebody, and oh well, that's life. Um, but orkneyology.com is where to go.
Mhm.
And Tom, this has been brilliant, and I wouldn't mind keeping going, but it's an
There's
hour and
always
three.
another night, William.
Yes, exactly. It's late over there, and I appreciate your staying up. So
Yeah,
thank you
no,
so much. Thank you for
my
everybody
time.
who've turned in, and feel
Yeah,
free to share this. Send it to your friends, and
please do.
so
And thank you to everybody that has put up with me for the last, hour and 50 minutes. That's
it's
a
a
long
pleasure.
sentence.
It's always a pleasure. And um, say hi to your new little granddaughter.
I will do indeed.
Okay. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye then.